The American West was a land of opportunity, a place where a person could reinvent themselves, a place where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. It was a land of cowboys and Indians, of gunfights and gold rushes, of vast open spaces and endless possibilities. But it was also a land of hard work, of grit, of determination. It was a land of forgotten jobs, of professions that have long since vanished into the mists of time. These were the jobs that built the West, the jobs that carved a civilization out of the wilderness, the jobs that were essential to the survival of the pioneers, the settlers, the dreamers who flocked to the frontier in search of a better life. These were the jobs that have been forgotten by history, but that deserve to be remembered. What were these forgotten jobs? What did it take to be a buffalo hunter, a pony express rider, a Gandy Dancer? What was it like to work as a chimney sweep, a snake oil salesman, a riverboat pilot? In this video, we're going to explore 25 forgotten frontier jobs that have vanished completely. We're going to look at what these jobs entailed, why they were important, and why they disappeared. So, saddle up and get ready for a journey into the lost world of the American frontier. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Number 1. The Buffalo Hunter. The American bison, or buffalo, was the lifeblood of the Great Plains. For the Native Americans, it was a source of food, clothing, shelter, and spiritual sustenance. For the pioneers, it was a source of meat, hides, and a seemingly endless supply of fuel. But for the buffalo hunter, it was a source of income, a way to make a living in a harsh and unforgiving land. Buffalo hunters were a special breed of men. They were tough, resourceful, and expert marksmen. They would venture out onto the plains for months at a time, living off the land and killing buffalo by the thousands. They used powerful long-range rifles like the Sharp's .50 caliber to bring down the massive animals from a distance of several hundred yards. The Sharp's was a single-shot rifle, but in the hands of a skilled hunter, it was deadly accurate. The technique was simple but brutal. The hunter would find a herd, position himself downwind, and begin shooting. He would aim for the lungs, not the head, to avoid spooking the herd. A buffalo shot through the lungs would stand still, bleeding internally, while the rest of the herd continued to graze. The hunter could kill dozens of animals before the herd finally stampeded. After the killing came the skinning. The hunter would work with a team of skinners who would use sharp knives to remove the hide. It was back-breaking work, done under the blazing sun or in freezing cold. The hides were the prize. They were stretched, dried, and bundled for shipment back east, where they were used to make leather goods, from shoes and belts to industrial machine belts for factories. The demand was insatiable, and the buffalo hunters were happy to supply it. In the 1870s, a good hunter could make as much as $100 a day, a fortune at the time when a cowboy earned $30 a month. But the days of the buffalo hunter were numbered. The slaughter was unsustainable. In the 1860s, there were an estimated 30 to 60 million buffalo on the plains. By 1890, there were fewer than 1,000. The buffalo were gone, and with them went the buffalo hunter. A way of life that had defined the plains for a brief, bloody moment had vanished forever. Number 2. The Pony Express Rider. The Pony Express was a mail service that operated for a brief, glorious period from April 1860 to October 1861. It was a relay system of riders on horseback who carried mail from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, a distance of over 1,800 miles. It was a daring, romantic, and incredibly dangerous enterprise. The riders were young, wiry, and fearless. The famous ad for riders read, "Wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellows, not over 18. Must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred." While this ad may be apocryphal, it captures the spirit of the enterprise. The riders were paid the princely sum of $100 to $150 a month, a small fortune for the time, but they earned every penny of it. The riders would ride for 75 to 100 miles at a stretch, changing horses at relay stations every 10 to 15 miles. The change had to be done in 2 minutes or less. The rider would gallop into the station, leap off his exhausted horse, grab the mochila, a leather mail pouch, throw it over a fresh horse, and gallop away. It was a choreographed dance of speed and efficiency. They rode day and night, in all kinds of weather, through some of the most dangerous territory in the country. They faced blizzards in the mountains, flash floods in the desert, and attacks by Native Americans who saw the Pony Express as an intrusion into their lands. They were armed with a revolver and a knife, but their best defense was speed. They were expected to cover their route at an average speed of 10 miles per hour, an astonishing pace for the time. The Pony Express was a marvel of its time. It could deliver a letter from Missouri to California in just 10 days, a journey that had previously taken months by wagon or ship. But it was also a financial disaster. It cost $16 to send a half-ounce letter, and even at that price, the company never made a profit. And it was made obsolete almost as soon as it began. The completion of the transcontinental telegraph in October 1861 spelled the end of the Pony Express. A message that had taken 10 days to deliver by horse could now be sent in a matter of minutes by wire. The Pony Express was dead, but the legend of the young, wiry riders who risked their lives to carry the mail lives on. Number 3. The Gandy Dancer. The railroads were the iron arteries of the American West. They connected the East Coast to the West Coast, the cities to the frontier, the past to the future. But the railroads did not build themselves. They were built by the sweat and blood of thousands of men who laid the track, drove the spikes, and kept the trains running. These men were called Gandy Dancers. The term Gandy Dancer is a slang term for a railroad worker. The origin of the term is obscure, but it may have come from the Gandy Manufacturing Company of Chicago, which made track-laying tools. Or it may have come from the rhythmic, dance-like movements of the workers as they used their tools to align the track. The men would work in teams, using long iron bars to lift and shift the rails into place, moving in unison to the rhythm of a work song. Whatever the origin of the term, the work of the Gandy Dancer was hard, dangerous, and low-paying. The Gandy Dancers were mostly immigrants, from Ireland, from China, from Mexico. They were paid a pittance, often as little as $1 a day, and they lived in squalid conditions in temporary camps along the railroad line. They worked from sunup to sundown in all kinds of weather, with little more than their bare hands and a few simple tools. They faced the constant danger of accidents. A misplaced spike could cause a derailment. A shifting rail could crush a man's foot or leg. The work was so dangerous that it was said that there was a dead Irishman buried under every mile of track on the Transcontinental Railroad. This was an exaggeration, but not by much. Hundreds of men died building the railroads, from accidents, from disease, from exhaustion. But the Gandy Dancers were also a proud and independent lot. They had their own songs, their own stories, their own culture. They were the men who built the railroads, the men who tamed the West. And they were made obsolete by the very machines that they helped to create. The development of track-laying machines and other automated equipment in the early 20th century made the Gandy Dancer a thing of the past. The work of laying and maintaining track was now done by machines, not by men. The Gandy Dancer had danced his last dance. Comment Iron Horse if you understand the importance of these men. Number 4. The Bullwhacker. Before the railroads, there were the wagon trains. And before the wagon trains, there were the freight wagons. These were the giant lumbering vehicles that carried goods across the plains, from the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains. And the men who drove these wagons were called bullwhackers. A bullwhacker was the driver of a team of oxen. Oxen were the preferred draft animals on the plains. They were strong, they were durable, and they could live off the land, eating the prairie grass as they went. But they were also slow, stubborn, and cantankerous. It took a special kind of man to get a team of oxen to move. It took a bullwhacker. The bullwhacker was a master of the whip. He carried a long braided leather whip called a bullwhip, which could be 15 to 20 feet long. He could crack the whip with a sound like a rifle shot, a sound that could be heard for miles across the prairie. He used the whip not to strike the oxen, but to guide them, to encourage them, to communicate with them. The crack of the whip was the language of the bullwhacker, a language that the oxen understood. The bullwhacker was also a master of profanity. It was said that a bullwhacker could curse for 10 minutes straight without repeating himself. The profanity was not just for show, it was part of the job. It was a way of asserting his authority over the oxen, of letting them know who was boss. The oxen seemed to respond to the cursing as if they understood that it was a sign of the bullwhacker's determination and will. The life of a bullwhacker was a hard one. He walked beside his wagon for 10 to 15 miles a day in all kinds of weather. He ate dust in the summer. He froze in the winter. He slept on the ground, under the wagon, with nothing but a blanket for warmth. He fought off Indians. He crossed flooded rivers. He climbed steep mountain passes. He was a lonely, isolated figure, a man who was more comfortable with oxen than with people. The bullwhacker was a key figure in the settlement of the West. He was the man who brought the supplies, the tools, the necessities of life to the frontier. But he was also a man who was made obsolete by progress. The coming of the railroads in the 1860s and 1870s made the freight wagon a thing of the past. The goods that had once been carried by oxen were now carried by iron horses. The bullwhacker had cracked his last whip. Number 5. The mule skinner. The mule skinner was the cousin of the bullwhacker. He was the driver of a team of mules. Mules were the other preferred draft animals on the plains. They were smaller than oxen, but they were faster, smarter, and more sure-footed. They were ideal for pulling wagons through the mountains, where the trails were narrow and treacherous. The mule skinner was a different breed of man from the bullwhacker. He was not a master of the whip, but a master of psychology. He understood the mule, its intelligence, its stubbornness, its pride. A mule is a hybrid, the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse, and it inherits the best qualities of both parents. But it also inherits a legendary stubbornness. A mule that decides not to move will not move, no matter how much you beat it. The mule skinner did not try to force the mule to do his bidding, but to persuade it, to cajole it, to outwit it. He used a long, thin whip, called a blacksnake, but he used it sparingly. He relied more on his voice, on a complex vocabulary of commands, curses, and endearments. He talked to his mules, he sang to them, he reasoned with them. He was a mule whisperer. The mule skinner was also a master of the jerk line, a single rein that was attached to the lead mule. By pulling on the jerk line, the mule skinner could guide the entire team of mules, turning them left or right, starting them or stopping them. It was a subtle and sophisticated system of communication, a system that required a light touch and a deep understanding of the animals. A good mule skinner could control a team of 20 mules with nothing but a jerk line and his voice. The life of a mule skinner was just as hard as the life of a bullwhacker. He walked beside his wagon for miles on end. He faced the same dangers. He endured the same hardships. But he was also a more respected figure. He was seen as a skilled professional, a man who had mastered a difficult and demanding craft. The mule skinner earned more than the bullwhacker, sometimes as much as $50 a month, because his skills were in higher demand. The mule skinner, like the bullwhacker, was made obsolete by the railroads. The iron horse replaced the mule, and the mule skinner was out of a job. But the legend of the mule skinner lives on in the songs, the stories, and the folklore of the American West. Comment jerkline if you understand the skill of the mule skinner. Number 6. The ice cutter. Before the age of refrigeration, there was the age of ice. And in the age of ice, there was the ice cutter. The ice cutter was a man who harvested ice from frozen lakes and ponds in the winter so that it could be used to keep things cold in the summer. It was a cold, wet, and dangerous job, but it was an essential one. The ice cutter would wait until the ice was at least a foot thick, usually in January or February. Then he would go out onto the ice with a team of horses and a variety of specialized tools. He would use a horse-drawn plow to score the ice in a grid pattern, creating lines that marked where the ice would be cut. Then he would use a long, sharp saw to cut the ice into large blocks, weighing as much as 300 pounds each. The work was dangerous, the ice was slippery, and a man could easily fall and break a bone. The water beneath the ice was freezing, and a man who fell through the ice could die of hypothermia in minutes. The horses were also at risk if a horse broke through the ice. It would often have to be shot because it was impossible to pull it out. Once the blocks were cut, they would be floated down a channel to an ice house, where they would be stored in sawdust and straw until they were needed. The sawdust and straw acted as insulation, keeping the ice frozen even in the heat of summer. A well-insulated ice house could keep ice for months or even a year. The ice was used for a variety of purposes. It was used to refrigerate food, to make ice cream, to cool drinks. It was used in hospitals, in hotels, in restaurants. It was a luxury, but it was also a necessity. It was a way of preserving food, of preventing disease, of making life more comfortable in the days before electric refrigeration. The ice-cutting industry was a major employer in the 19th century. It employed thousands of men, and it was a vital part of the economy. But it was also an industry that was doomed to extinction. The invention of artificial refrigeration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries made the ice cutter obsolete. The ice that had once been harvested from frozen lakes could now be made in a factory, year-round, in any quantity. The ice cutter had cut his last block. Number 7. The lamplighter. Before the age of electricity, the nights were dark. The streets of the cities were lit by the moon, by the stars, by the occasional lantern. But as the cities grew, the need for a more reliable source of light became apparent. And so the gas lamp was born. And with the gas lamp came the lamplighter. The lamplighter was a man who was responsible for lighting the gas street lamps at dusk and extinguishing them at dawn. He would walk the streets of the city with a long pole, which he would use to turn on the gas valve and light the lamp with a small flame at the end of the pole. It was a solitary and romantic job, a job that was often passed down from father to son. The lamplighter was a familiar and beloved figure in the 19th century city. He was a symbol of security, of order, of the triumph of light over darkness. He was the man who brought the light, the man who chased away the shadows. He was a friend to the lonely, a guide to the lost, a guardian of the night. Children would watch for him from their windows, and they would wave to him as he passed. The lamplighter had a regular route, and he would walk it every evening at the same time. He knew every lamp on his route, and he knew which ones were temperamental, which ones needed extra care. He was a craftsman, a professional, a man who took pride in his work. But the days of the lamplighter were numbered. The invention of the electric light bulb in the late 19th century spelled the end of the gas lamp. The soft, flickering glow of the gas lamp was replaced by the harsh, steady glare of the electric light. The lamplighter was out of a job. His pole was put away, His route was forgotten. His light was extinguished. The man who had brought the light had been replaced by a switch. Number 8. The town crier. Before the age of mass communication, there was the town crier. The town crier was a man who was responsible for spreading the news. He would walk through the streets of a town, ringing a bell to attract attention and then shouting out the latest news, proclamations, and advertisements. He was the original newsman, the original talking newspaper. The town crier was an important figure in the life of a colonial or frontier town. He was the source of information, the link between the government and the people. He would announce new laws, new taxes, new regulations. He would announce the arrival of a ship, the birth of a prince, the outbreak of a war. He would announce sales, auctions, and public events. He was the voice of the town. The town crier would typically begin his announcements with the cry, "Oyez, oyez, oyez," which is a French word meaning, "Hear ye." This was a signal to the townspeople to stop what they were doing and listen. The town crier would then read his announcement in a loud, clear voice, repeating it several times to make sure that everyone heard it. The town crier was a respected and trusted figure. He had to be literate. He had to have a loud voice, and he had to be able to command the attention of a crowd. He was often a man of some standing in the community, a man who was known for his honesty and his integrity. His word was law because he spoke for the government, but the town crier was made obsolete by the printing press. The development of newspapers in the 18th and 19th centuries made the town crier a thing of the past. The news that had once been shouted in the streets could now be read in the comfort of your own home. The town crier had cried his last cry. His bell had fallen silent. Number 9. The cooper. A cooper is a man who makes barrels, and in the 19th century, barrels were the most important container in the world. They were the shipping containers of their day. They were used to transport everything from flour and sugar to whiskey and whale oil. They were used to store food, to ferment wine, to cure meat. They were the backbone of the global economy. The cooper was a highly skilled craftsman. He worked with wood, with iron, with fire. He would take long, thin staves of wood, usually oak or pine, and bend them into a circular shape using steam and fire. The staves had to be cut to precise dimensions with a slight curve so that they would fit together perfectly. The cooper would then fit the staves together, creating a barrel shape, and bind them with iron hoops. The hoops had to be hammered into place with great force to create a watertight seal. It was a difficult and demanding job, a job that required strength, precision, and a deep understanding of the properties of wood. A good cooper could make a barrel that would last for decades, a barrel that could be shipped around the world, a barrel that could hold the most valuable commodities without leaking a drop. The cooper was a vital member of any frontier community. He made the barrels that were used to store the harvest, to transport the goods, to preserve the food. He was a man who was in constant demand, a man who was essential to the survival of the community. A town without a cooper was a town without a future, but the cooper was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The invention of the metal can in the early 19th century, the cardboard box in the late 19th century, and the plastic container in the 20th century all contributed to the decline of the barrel. The barrel was no longer the most important container in the world, and the cooper was no longer the most important craftsman in the town. The age of the barrel was over, and with it went the age of the cooper. Comment iron hoops if you appreciate the skill of the cooper. Number 10. The wheelwright. A wheelwright is a man who makes wheels, and in the 19th century, the wheel was the most important invention in the world. It was the invention that made travel possible, that made commerce possible, that made civilization possible. And the wheelwright was the man who made it all happen. The wheelwright was a master craftsman. He worked with wood, with iron, with fire. He would take a solid block of wood, usually oak or elm, and carve it into a hub. The hub was the center of the wheel, and it had to be perfectly round, perfectly balanced. He would then shape the spokes, which radiated out from the hub like the rays of the sun. The spokes had to be strong but also flexible, to absorb the shocks of the road. Then came the rim, which was made of several curved pieces of wood called felloes that were fitted together to form a circle. The spokes were fitted into the rim, and the whole assembly was held together by the precision of the joinery. There were no nails, no screws, just wood fitted into wood with a precision that was breathtaking. But the wheelwright was not done yet. The final step was to bind the wheel with an iron tire. The tire was a circular band of iron that was heated in a fire until it was red hot. The wheelwright would then quickly place the hot tire over the wooden wheel. As the iron cooled, it would shrink, creating a bond that was as strong as steel. The tire would compress the wooden parts of the wheel, making it even stronger and more durable. The wheelwright was a key figure in any frontier town. He made the wheels for the wagons, the carts, the carriages. He kept the wheels of commerce turning. He was a man who was in constant demand, a man who was essential to the life of the town. Without wheels, there was no transportation. Without transportation, there was no trade. Without trade, there was no civilization. But the wheelwright was made obsolete by the rise of the automobile. The wooden wheel was replaced by the rubber tire. The craft of the wheelwright was replaced by the assembly line of the factory. The man who had made the wheels of the world go round was now a relic of a bygone era. The age of the wheelwright was over. Comment, iron tire. If you appreciate the skill of the wheelwright, but here's the problem. We've lost more than just these jobs. We've lost the skills, the knowledge, the wisdom that went with them. We've lost the ability to work with our hands, to create with our minds, to survive with our wits. We've become dependent on machines, on factories, on corporations. We've become soft, and that's a problem. Because when the machines break down, when the factories close, when the corporations fail, we're going to need those old skills again. We're going to need to know how to make a barrel, how to make a wheel, how to survive without electricity. And we don't. We've forgotten. Number 11. The Blacksmith. The blacksmith was the master of fire-pull iron. He was the man who could take a lump of metal and turn it into a tool, a weapon, a work of art. He was the man who made the nails that held the houses together, the horseshoes that shod the horses, the plows that tilled the fields, the axes that chopped the wood. He was the man who made the world work. The blacksmith was a powerful and respected figure in any frontier community. He was a man of immense strength, a man who could swing a 10-pound hammer all day long. He was a man of great skill, a man who understood the secrets of the forge, the mysteries of the metal. He knew how to heat the iron to just the right temperature, how to hammer it into shape, how to quench it in water, to harden it. He was a man who was both feared and admired, a man who was part magician, part artist, part engineer. The blacksmith shop was the heart of the town. It was a place of fire and smoke, of noise and sweat, of creation and transformation. It was a place where things were made, where things were repaired, where things were given new life. It was a place where the impossible was made possible. A farmer would bring in a broken plow, and the blacksmith would make it whole again. A cowboy would bring in a lame horse, and the blacksmith would shoe it and send it on its way. The blacksmith was also a social center. Men would gather at the blacksmith shop to talk, to exchange news, to tell stories. It was a place where the community came together, where friendships were forged, where deals were made. The blacksmith was often a wise and trusted advisor, a man who had seen it all, a man who could offer counsel and guidance. But the blacksmith was made obsolete by the Industrial Revolution. The mass production of iron and steel goods in factories made the blacksmith a thing of the past. The nails, the horseshoes, the plows that had once been made by hand were now made by machine. Faster, cheaper, and in greater quantities. The blacksmith had been replaced by the factory. The age of iron had given way to the age of steel, and the blacksmith had been left behind. Number 12. The tanner. A tanner is a man who turns animal hides into leather. And in the 19th century, leather was one of the most important materials in the world. It was used to make shoes, boots, saddles, harnesses, belts, gloves, and 1,000 other things. It was a material that was strong, durable, and versatile, and the tanner was the man who made it. The tanner was a man who was not afraid to get his hands dirty. The process of tanning was a long, smelly, and unpleasant one. It involved soaking the hides in a solution of water and lime to loosen the hair and the flesh. This process, called laming, could take several days. The hides would then be scraped clean with a sharp knife, removing all the hair and flesh. This was backbreaking work done by hand. After the hides were clean, they would be soaked in a solution of water and tannin, a chemical that is found in the bark of certain trees, like oak or hemlock. The tannin would bind to the proteins in the hide, preserving it and turning it into leather. This process could take months or even years, depending on the thickness of the hide and the quality of the leather desired. The tannery was a place that was best avoided. It was a place of foul odors, of rotting flesh, of vats of toxic chemicals. The smell of a tannery could be detected from miles away, a sickly sweet stench that clung to your clothes and your hair. It was a place that was often located on the outskirts of town, downwind, for good reason. But it was also a place that was essential to the life of the town. It was the place that produced the leather that was used to make the shoes that people wore, the saddles that they rode on, the harnesses that they used to plow their fields. The tanner was a man who was both essential and despised. He was a man who performed a vital service, but who was also seen as an outcast, a pariah. He was a man who was surrounded by death, but who created new life. He was a man who was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The invention of synthetic materials like plastic and vinyl made leather less important. And the development of new, more efficient tanning methods using chromium salts instead of vegetable tannins made the old-fashioned tanner a thing of the past. Number 13. The Prospector. The prospector was the dreamer of the American West. He was the man who went in search of gold, of silver, of treasure. He was the man who believed that he could strike it rich, that he could find a fortune in the ground. He was the man who was willing to risk everything, to endure anything, for the chance of a lifetime. The prospector was a solitary and romantic figure. He would venture out into the wilderness with a pick, a shovel, and a pan. He would spend his days panning for gold in the icy streams of the mountains or digging for silver in the scorching heat of the desert. He would live on a diet of beans and bacon. He would sleep under the stars. He would dream of the mother lode. Panning for gold was a simple but tedious process. The prospector would scoop up gravel from the bottom of a stream and place it in a shallow pan. He would then swirl the pan in water, washing away the lighter gravel and leaving behind the heavier gold. It was a process that required patience, skill, and a lot of luck. Most prospectors would spend days panning and find nothing but a few flakes of gold dust, barely enough to buy a meal. Most prospectors never found it. They died poor, they died alone, they died forgotten. They died of exposure, of starvation, of disease. They died in mining accidents, in bar fights, in the lonely wilderness. But a few of them did. A few of them struck it rich. A few of them found the mother lode. And it was their stories, their legends, that fueled the dreams of a generation. It was their stories that sent thousands of men rushing to California in 1849, to Colorado in 1859, to Nevada in the 1860s, in search of their own fortune. The gold rushes were a defining moment in American history, a moment when ordinary men believed that they could become rich beyond their wildest dreams. And the prospector was the symbol of that dream. The prospector was a key figure in the settlement of the West. He was the man who opened up the wilderness, who discovered the mineral wealth of the land, who paved the way for the miners, the ranchers, the farmers who would follow. But he was also a man who was made obsolete by the very industry that he helped to create. The rise of large-scale industrial mining in the late 19th century made the individual prospector a thing of the past. The search for gold and silver was now a corporate enterprise, not a romantic quest. The prospector had been replaced by the geologist, the engineer, the corporation. Comment, mother lode, if you understand the dream of the prospector. Number 14, the Assayer. The Assayer was the man who separated the truth from the fiction. He was the man who could take a piece of rock and tell you if it was worthless or if it was worth a fortune. He was the man who could take a sample of ore and tell you how much gold, how much silver, how much lead it contained. He was the man who held the dreams of the prospector in the palm of his hand. The Assayer was a chemist, a metallurgist, a scientist. He worked in a small, cluttered laboratory filled with furnaces, with crucibles, with beakers and test tubes. He would take a sample of ore, crush it into a fine powder, and then mix it with a variety of chemicals, including lead oxide and borax. He would then heat the mixture in a furnace at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius until the metal separated from the rock. The molten metal would be poured into a mold where it would cool and solidify. The assayer would then weigh the metal and calculate its value based on the current market price. It was a precise and exacting science, a science that required a steady hand, a sharp eye, and a deep knowledge of chemistry and metallurgy. The assayer was a powerful and respected figure in any mining town. He was the man who determined the value of a claim, the man who settled disputes, the man who could make or break a man's fortune. A prospector would bring in a sample of ore, his eyes shining with hope, and the assayer would tell him if he was rich or if he was broke. The assayer's word was final. There was no appeal. The assayer had to be honest. He had to be impartial. He had to be above reproach. A dishonest assayer could ruin a man, or he could make a fortune for himself by undervaluing a claim and then buying it for himself. There were stories of corrupt assayers, of men who had been bribed, of men who had cheated. But most assayers were honest men, men who took pride in their work, men who understood the responsibility that they carried. But the assayer was made obsolete by the same forces that made the prospector obsolete. The rise of large-scale industrial mining made the individual assayer a thing of the past. The work of assaying was now done in large, centralized laboratories by teams of scientists and technicians using sophisticated equipment and advanced techniques. The assayer had been replaced by the corporation. Number 15, the sawyer. A sawyer is a man who saws wood, and in the 19th century, wood was the most important building material in the world. It was used to build houses, to build barns, to build fences, to build furniture. It was used to build the world, and the sawyer was the man who made it all possible. The sawyer was a man of strength and skill. He worked in a sawmill, a place of noise and dust and danger. The sawmill was powered by water or by steam, and it was a marvel of 19th century engineering. The heart of the sawmill was the saw, a massive circular blade or a long reciprocating blade that could cut through a giant log like a knife through butter. The sawyer's job was to take a giant log and guide it through the saw, cutting it into boards, into planks, into beams. It was a job that required a steady hand, a quick eye, and a healthy respect for the power of the machine. The saw was unforgiving. A moment's inattention, a slip of the hand, and the sawyer could lose a finger, a hand, or even his life. The sawmill was a dangerous place. The air was filled with sawdust, which could cause respiratory problems. The noise was deafening, which could cause hearing loss. The machinery was exposed, with belts and gears and spinning blades, any of which could catch a man's clothing and pull him into the machine. Accidents were common, and they were often fatal. But the sawmill was also a key industry in any frontier town. It was the place that produced the lumber that was used to build the town. It was a place that was in constant demand, a place that was essential to the growth and prosperity of the community. Without lumber, there were no houses. Without houses, there was no town. Without a town, there was no civilization. But the sawyer was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The invention of the chainsaw in the early 20th century made it possible to cut down trees faster and more efficiently. The development of more efficient sawmills with automated feed systems and computer-controlled saws made the work of the sawyer easier and safer. The rise of the modern lumber industry, with its vast forests and industrial-scale operations, made the small local sawmill a thing of the past. The sawyer had been replaced by the factory. Comment steam-powered saw if you can imagine the danger of this job. Number 16. The Shingle Maker. A shingle maker is a man who makes shingles, and in the 19th century, shingles were the most common roofing material in the world. They were used to roof houses, to roof barns, to roof sheds. They were a simple and effective way of keeping the rain out, and the shingle maker was the man who made them. The shingle maker was a craftsman who worked with wood. He would take a block of cedar or pine and split it into thin, flat shingles using a tool called a frow. A frow is a cleaving tool with a thick blade and a handle set at a right angle. The shingle maker would place the blade on the block of wood and strike it with a wooden mallet, splitting the wood along the grain. Cedar was the preferred wood for shingles because it was resistant to rot and insect. A cedar shingle could last for 20 or 30 years, or even longer. Pine was also used, but it was not as durable as cedar. After the shingles were split, they would be shaved to the proper thickness using a draw knife. A draw knife is a woodworking tool with a blade and two handles, one on each end. The shingle maker would pull the draw knife toward himself, shaving off thin layers of wood until the shingle was the right thickness. It was a job that required a good eye, a steady hand, and a deep understanding of the grain of the wood. The shingle maker was a common sight in any frontier community. He would often work on site, making the shingles as they were needed. He was a man who was in constant demand, a man who was essential to the construction of any new building. A house without a roof was not a house, and a roof without shingles was not a roof. But the shingle maker was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The invention of asphalt shingles in the early 20th century revolutionized the roofing industry. Asphalt shingles were cheaper, easier to install, and more durable than wooden shingles. They were also fireproof, which was a major advantage. The development of metal roofing, of tile roofing, of other more durable roofing materials all contributed to the decline of the wooden shingle. The shingle maker had been replaced by the factory. The age of the wooden shingle was over. Number 17. The Soddie Builder. A Soddie builder was a man who built houses out of sod. And on the Great Plains in the 19th century, sod was the most common building material. It was cheap, it was plentiful, and it was surprisingly durable. A sod house, or soddy, was a house that was literally made of dirt. The Great Plains were a treeless expanse, a sea of grass that stretched from the Missouri River to the Rocky Mountains. There was no wood for building, no stone for quarrying. The pioneers who settled the plains had to make do with what they had, and what they had was dirt, lots and lots of dirt. The Soddie Builder was a man who was not afraid of hard work. He would use a special plow, called a grasshopper plow or a breaking plow, to cut the sod into long, thick strips, about 12 inches wide and 4 inches thick. The sod was held together by the dense network of grass roots, which made it as strong as a brick. He would then cut the strips into blocks, about 2 to 3 feet long, and stack them like bricks to build the walls of the house. The walls of a soddy were thick, usually 2 to 3 feet thick, which made them excellent insulators. The roof would be made of a layer of sod, supported by a framework of logs or brush. The floor would be made of packed earth, which would eventually harden into a surface almost as hard as concrete. A soddy was not a beautiful house. It was a dark, damp, and often dirty place. It was a place that was prone to leaks, especially after a heavy rain. It was a place that was home to snakes, to insects, to mice. The pioneers joked that when it rained, the roof would leak for days, and when it stopped raining, the roof would drip for days more. But a soddy was also a place that was warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It was a place that was fireproof, which was a major advantage on the treeless plains. It was a place that was home. And for the pioneers who settled the Great Plains, it was often the only home they could afford. The Soddie Builder was a key figure in the settlement of the Great Plains. He was the man who provided shelter for the pioneers, who gave them a place to live, a place to raise their families. But he was also a man who was made obsolete by progress. The coming of the railroads brought cheap lumber to the plains. The pioneers no longer had to build their houses out of dirt. They could now build them out of wood, like civilized people. The age of the soddy was over. Number 18. The Buffalo Chip Collector. A buffalo chip collector was a person who collected buffalo chips, and on the Great Plains in the 19th century, buffalo chips were the most common fuel. They were the dried dung of the American bison, and they were a surprisingly good source of heat. They were the prairie coal. The buffalo chip collector was usually a woman or a child. It was considered beneath the dignity of a man to collect buffalo chips, so the task fell to the women and children of the family. They would walk across the prairie, gathering the chips in baskets or aprons. It was a task that was essential to the survival of the family. Without fuel, there was no fire. Without fire, there was no cooked food, no warmth, no light. The task was not without its humor. The pioneers had a sense of humor about their situation, and they made jokes about the buffalo chip collector. As one pioneer poem from the 1890s put it, "I'm looking for buffalo chips, stranger. There hain't no posies here." The buffalo chip collector was a key figure in the settlement of the Great Plains. They were the people who provided the fuel that was used to cook the food, to warm the homes, to keep the pioneers alive. But they were also people who were made obsolete by the near extinction of the buffalo. When the buffalo were gone, the buffalo chips were gone. And with them went the buffalo chip collector. Number 19. The Charcoal Burner. A charcoal burner was a man who made charcoal, and in the 19th century, charcoal was a vital fuel. It was used by blacksmiths, by tinsmiths, by anyone who needed a hot, clean-burning fire. It was the fuel that powered the forges of the frontier. The charcoal burner was a man who worked in the woods. He would build a large, conical mound of wood, called a charcoal pile or a charcoal kiln. The mound could be 30 feet in diameter and 10 feet high. He would then cover the mound with earth and sod, leaving a few small vents at the top and bottom. He would then set the wood on fire and let it smolder for days or even weeks. The key to making charcoal was to control the amount of oxygen that reached the fire. If there was too much oxygen, the wood would burn completely, leaving only ash. If there was too little oxygen, the fire would go out. The charcoal burner had to monitor the fire constantly, adjusting the vents, adding more earth, making sure that the fire burned at just the right temperature. The lack of oxygen would prevent the wood from burning completely and would instead turn it into charcoal. Charcoal is almost pure carbon, and it burns hotter and cleaner than wood. It was the ideal fuel for a blacksmith's forge, where high temperatures were needed to work iron and steel. The charcoal burner was a solitary and mysterious figure. He lived in a small hut in the woods, often for weeks at a time, tending his charcoal pile. He was often seen as an outcast, a man who was not quite part of civilized society. He was dirty, he smelled of smoke, he lived alone in the woods. But he was also a man who was essential to the life of the town. He was the man who provided the fuel that was used to make the tools, the weapons, the necessities of life. But the charcoal burner was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The discovery of coal and the development of coke, a fuel that is made from coal by heating it in the absence of air, made charcoal less important. Coke burned hotter and longer than charcoal, and it was cheaper to produce. The charcoal burner had been replaced by the coal mine. The age of charcoal was over. Number 20. The lime burner. A lime burner was a man who made lime, and in the 19th century, lime was a vital material. It was used to make mortar, to make plaster, to make cement. It was the glue that held the world together, and the lime burner was the man who made it. The lime burner was a man who worked with fire and stone. He would build a large stone kiln, often built into the side of a hill. The kiln could be 20 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter. He would then fill the kiln with limestone, a sedimentary rock that is composed mainly of calcium carbonate. He would then build a fire in the kiln, using wood or coal as fuel, and heat the limestone to a temperature of over 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat would cause a chemical reaction called calcination that would drive off the carbon dioxide from the limestone, leaving behind quicklime or calcium oxide. The process could take several days, and it required a constant supply of fuel and a careful monitoring of the temperature. Quicklime was a dangerous substance. It was highly caustic, and it could burn the skin and eyes. When mixed with water, it would produce a violent exothermic reaction, releasing a large amount of heat. The lime burner had to be careful when handling quicklime, or he could be seriously injured. But quicklime was also a valuable substance. When mixed with water and sand, it would produce mortar, Sawyer, which was used to bind bricks and stones together. When mixed with water alone, it would produce slaked lime, or calcium hydroxide, which was used to make plaster and whitewash. The lime burner was a man who was essential to the construction industry. He was the man who provided the material that was used to build the houses, the churches, the public buildings. He was a man who was in constant demand, a man who was essential to the growth of any town or city. But the lime burner was made obsolete by the development of new technologies. The invention of Portland cement in the mid-19th century made lime less important. Portland cement was stronger, more durable, and easier to use than lime. It was made by heating limestone and clay together at very high temperatures and then grinding the resulting clinker into a fine powder. The lime burner had been replaced by the cement factory. The age of lime was over. Comment 1,600 degrees if you can feel the heat from here. Number 21. The drover. The drover was the original cowboy. He was the man who drove the great herds of cattle from the plains of Texas to the railheads in Kansas. He was the man who lived in the saddle, who slept under the stars, who faced the dangers of the trail with a quiet courage and a steady hand. The drover was a man who knew cattle. He knew how to handle them, how to calm them, how to keep them moving. He knew how to read the weather, how to find water, how to cross a river. He was a man who was at one with the land, at one with the animals. He could tell by the way a cow moved if it was sick, if it was lame, if it was about to bolt. The cattle drive was a long and arduous journey. It could last for months, and it could cover 1,000 miles or more. The drovers would start in the spring when the grass was green and the water was plentiful. They would drive the cattle north, following the great cattle trails like the Chisholm Trail or the Goodnight Loving Trail, moving at a pace of 10 to 15 miles a day. The drovers would face stampedes, thunderstorms, and attacks by rustlers. A stampede was the drover's worst nightmare. It could be triggered by anything: a flash of lightning, a rattlesnake, a sudden noise. The cattle would bolt, running in a blind panic, trampling anything in their path. The drovers would have to ride alongside the stampeding herd, trying to turn it, trying to slow it down, trying to bring it under control. It was dangerous work, and many drovers were killed in stampedes. They would endure dust, heat, and boredom. The dust was constant, a fine, choking powder that got into your eyes, your nose, your lungs. The heat was oppressive, especially in the summer, when the temperature could reach 100 degrees or more. And the boredom was crushing, day after day of the same routine, the same landscape, the same faces. They would live on a diet of beans, bacon, and coffee. The food was cooked by the camp cook, who traveled with the herd in a chuck wagon. The food was simple, but it was filling. The coffee was strong and black, and it was the only thing that kept the drovers going. It was a hard life, but it was also a free life. It was a life that was lived on the open range, under the open sky. It was a life that was defined by the rhythm of the cattle, the rhythm of the land. It was a life that was soon to end. The drover was a key figure in the history of the American West. He was the man who brought the beef to the nation, who fed the growing cities of the East. But he was also a man who was made obsolete by the fencing of the open range. The development of barbed wire in the 1870s and 1880s brought an end to the great cattle drives. The open range was divided up into ranches, and the cattle were now raised on fenced land and shipped to market by rail. The drover had been replaced by the rancher, the railroad, the stockyard. The age of the cattle drive was over. Number 22, the fur trapper. The fur trapper was the pathfinder of the American West. He was the man who ventured into the wilderness in search of beaver, of mink, of otter. He was the man who explored the rivers, the mountains, the forests. He was the man who opened up the West. The fur trapper was a solitary and self-reliant figure. He would spend months or even years in the wilderness with only his horse, his rifle, and his traps for company. He would live off the land, hunting game, fishing the streams, gathering wild plants. He would trade with the Native Americans, exchanging goods for furs, for information, for safe passage through their lands. He would face the dangers of the wild with a stoic and unflinching courage. The fur trade was a brutal and competitive business. The trappers would compete with each other, with the Native Americans, with the great fur companies like the Hudson's Bay Company and the American Fur Company for the best trapping grounds. They would face the constant threat of starvation, of disease, of attack by grizzly bears or hostile tribes. It was a life that was lived on the edge, a life that was often short and violent. The beaver was the most prized fur. Beaver pelts were used to make felt, which was used to make hats. The beaver hat was the height of fashion in Europe and America in the early 19th century, and the demand for beaver pelts was insatiable. A good trapper could make a fortune in a single season if he was lucky, if he was skilled, if he survived. The fur trapper was a key figure in the exploration of the West. He was the man who discovered the passes through the mountains, who mapped the rivers, who blazed the trails. Men like Jedediah Smith, Jim Bridger, and Kit Carson were fur trappers before they became legendary mountain men. They were the first white men to see many of the wonders of the West, from the geysers of Yellowstone to the deserts of the Southwest. But the fur trapper was also a man who was made obsolete by the changing fashions of the world. The decline in the demand for beaver hats in the 1830s and 1840s, as silk hats became more popular, brought an end to the great days of the fur trade. The beaver were also becoming scarce, trapped out by decades of overhunting. The fur trapper had been replaced by the silk hat, the factory, the modern world. The age of the mountain man was over. Number 23. The market hunter. The market hunter was a man who hunted for a living. He was not a sportsman. He was not a conservationist. He was a professional, a man who killed wild game for the market. He would hunt anything that he could sell, from ducks and geese to deer and elk. He was a man who was ruthlessly efficient, a man who could kill with a cold and calculating precision. The market hunter was a product of the 19th century. The growth of the cities created a huge demand for wild game. Wild duck, wild goose, wild turkey, venison, all were considered delicacies, and they commanded high prices in the markets of New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. And the market hunter was there to supply it. He would use a variety of methods to kill his prey. For waterfowl, he would use a punt gun, a massive shotgun that was mounted on a small boat. The punt gun could fire a pound or more of shot, and it could kill dozens of ducks with a single blast. The market hunter would paddle his boat into a flock of ducks, aim the punt gun, and fire. The result was carnage. For passenger pigeons, he would use nets. The passenger pigeon was once the most abundant bird in North America, with flocks that numbered in the billions. The market hunter would set up nets in the trees where the pigeons roosted, and then use decoys and noise to drive the birds into the nets. He could catch hundreds of pigeons at a time. The pigeons were then killed, packed in barrels, and shipped to the cities. The market hunter was a key figure in the destruction of America's wildlife. He was the man who drove the passenger pigeon to extinction. The last passenger pigeon died in captivity in 1914. He was the man who decimated the herds of buffalo, who pushed the populations of ducks, geese, and other game birds to the brink of collapse. He was a man who was motivated by profit, not by passion. He was a man who saw the natural world as a resource to be exploited, not as a treasure to be preserved. The market hunter was made obsolete by the rise of the conservation movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The passage of new laws, like the Lacey Act of 1900, made it illegal to transport illegally killed game across state lines. The passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 made it illegal to hunt migratory birds for commercial purposes. The market hunter had been put out of business. The age of unrestrained slaughter was over. Number 24. The Snake Oil Salesman. The snake oil salesman was the con man of the American West. He was the man who traveled from town to town, selling miracle cures, magic elixirs, and patent medicines. He was the man who promised to cure everything from baldness to cancer, from rheumatism to consumption. He was the man who sold hope in a bottle. The snake oil salesman was a master of psychology, a master of persuasion, a master of the art of the deal. He would set up a stage on the back of his wagon, and he would put on a show. He would hire a brass band. He would hire a troupe of actors. He would hire a beautiful woman to sing and dance. He would do whatever it took to attract a crowd, to win their trust, to separate them from their money. The snake oil salesman would give a pitch, a carefully rehearsed speech that was designed to appeal to the fears and the hopes of his audience. He would tell stories of miraculous cures, of people who had been on death's door and who had been saved by his medicine. He would offer testimonials from satisfied customers who were often actors that he had hired. He would create a sense of urgency, telling the crowd that he only had a limited supply, that they had to buy now or miss their chance. The snake oil that he sold was usually a worthless concoction of alcohol, opium, and a variety of herbs and spices. It was a placebo at best, a poison at worst. The alcohol would give the patient a temporary feeling of well-being, and the opium would dull the pain. But it would not cure anything. It was not the medicine that he was selling. It was the dream of a life without pain, a life without sickness, a life without death. The term snake oil comes from a real product. Chinese immigrants who worked on the railroads in the 19th century used oil from the Chinese water snake to treat joint pain and inflammation. The oil was rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and it may have had some medicinal value. But the snake oil that was sold by the snake oil salesman was not made from Chinese water snakes. It was made from rattlesnakes, or it was not made from snakes at all. It was a fraud. The snake oil salesman was a colorful and entertaining figure. He was a rogue, a scoundrel, a charlatan. But he was also a reflection of his time. He was a product of an age of ignorance, of superstition, of desperation. He was a man who preyed on the fears and the hopes of the pioneers. And he was a man who was made obsolete by the rise of modern medicine. The passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 made it illegal to sell fraudulent and mislabeled medicines. The snake oil salesman had been exposed. His show was over. Number 25. The Riverboat Pilot. The Riverboat Pilot was the king of the Mississippi. He was the man who steered the great steamboats up and down the river, from New Orleans to St. Louis, from St. Louis to St. Paul. He was the man who knew the river, its currents, its sandbars, its snags. He was the man who held the lives of hundreds of passengers in the palm of his hand. The Riverboat Pilot was a man of immense skill and experience. He had to memorize every bend, every island, every landmark on the river. The Mississippi River is over 10,300 miles long, and it is constantly changing. Sandbars shift, islands appear and disappear, channels move. The pilot had to know the river in the dark, in the fog, in the flood. He had to be able to read the surface of the water to see the hidden dangers that lay beneath. The pilot would look for telltale signs on the surface of the water. A ripple might indicate a sandbar. A swirl might indicate a snag, a submerged tree trunk that could rip the hull of the boat. A change in the color of the water might indicate a change in depth. The pilot had to be able to read these signs instantly and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. The Riverboat Pilot was a powerful and respected figure. He was the highest-paid man on the river, earning more than the captain. He could earn $250 a month or more, a princely sum at the time. He was a man who was a law unto himself, a man who answered to no one. The captain might own the boat, but the pilot commanded it. When the pilot was at the wheel, his word was law. Mark Twain, the famous American author, was a riverboat pilot before he became a writer. He wrote about his experiences in his book, Life on the Mississippi, which is a classic account of life on the river in the 19th century. Twain wrote, "A pilot in those days was the only unfettered and entirely independent human being that lived in the earth." But the riverboat pilot was made obsolete by the coming of the railroads. The railroads were faster, safer, and more reliable than the steamboats. They could travel in any weather. They could go anywhere, there were tracks, and they were not dependent on the vagaries of the river. The great days of the riverboat were over. The pilot had been replaced by the engineer. The king of the Mississippi had been dethroned. Conclusion. The echoes of the past. The American West was a land of change, a land of progress, a land of reinvention. And the jobs that we have looked at in this video are a testament to that fact. They were jobs that were created by the unique conditions of the frontier, and they were jobs that were destroyed by the very forces of progress that they helped to unleash. The buffalo hunter was made obsolete by the destruction of the buffalo. The Pony Express rider was made obsolete by the telegraph. The Gandy Dancer was made obsolete by the machine. The Bullwhacker was made obsolete by the railroad. The fur trapper was made obsolete by the changing fashions of the world. The market hunter was made obsolete by the conservation movement. The snake oil salesman was made obsolete by modern medicine. The riverboat pilot was made obsolete by the railroad. These jobs are gone, but they are not forgotten. They are a part of our history, a part of our heritage, a part of who we are. They are a reminder of a time when the world was a different place, a time when men and women had to be tougher, more resourceful, more courageous. They are a reminder of the price of progress, of the cost of civilization. And they are a reminder that the world is always changing. The jobs that we do today may be the forgotten jobs of tomorrow. The skills that we value today may be the obsolete skills of the future. The only thing that is certain is change, and the only thing that we can do is to adapt, to learn, to grow, just as the pioneers did 200 years ago. For more on the forgotten skills of the pioneers, check out our video on why sod dugouts lasted generations while modern cabins collapse. And if you want to learn more about the fuel that powered the frontier, watch our video on what happens when you burn buffalo chips like frontiersmen did. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America.